Hi. So this is Nikki Tweedie on Deep Water Mind page, and I'm waiting for Ian Pitchford to join me. We've just had a brief conversation, and what we'd like to do is share a bit more of that conversation with all of you. So we've had a very basic check-in, and our intention is to progress that conversation in a way that's visible to other people, trying to demonstrate some of the aspects of Deep Water Mind and what we intend to share with you guys. So I'm trying to bring Ian into this conversation, and I don't know how to do that. So Ian, can you request to join me? Can you make a request to join me? So I'm able to allow your guest request to join you as a guest in your broadcast. There we go. Excellent. So it says that I'm you to lovely. It says that I'm you to lovely. It says that
So, what are we going to talk about, Nikki?
So yesterday I had the experience of sitting with a group of other psychological therapists, and one of the things that we were talking about, hi Sarah, is how difficult it is to look after ourselves, and we got focused around a conversation about taking a lunch break and how difficult it was for people to give themselves permission to take a lunch break. So hi Laura. So it kind of stuck with me, and often when things stick with me, I want to turn them over in my mind, and I often talk with you about it. And I suggested to you that rather than having that kind of full conversation together, that we might have more visibly together tonight. So yeah, that's what's on my mind, this idea that those of us that want to give care to other people often have difficulty in taking time to make sure we're resourced enough to do that job, whether you're a parent or a carer, or you work in some way to emotionally support or benefit, or perhaps maybe even teachers, or other people who are emotionally invested in their work.
And I often think I agree with you. I think that's one of those. It's one of those things that at times the idea of self-care, the idea of it sometimes for lots of people seems very indulgent, and when they're immersed in a culture and an environment, as you and I have spoken about many times before, like for example, like the NHS, where there's an expectation about I don't know, a sense of lack of efficiency, or that people can work harder, is that people perhaps at times don't notice that this is the third day in a row where I've forgotten to eat my lunch, or that I've simply just been able to somehow, that it's wrong or bad to be able to take time just to attend to myself on a really actually practical level, let alone on an emotional or psychological level.
On a bad day, I would say that I don't even notice I'm hungry. I don't even notice that I'm thirsty, and I can suppress the need to go to the toilet for a long time as well, in a way that I'm sure I just don't when I'm having fun or I'm having family time, or there's something about our natural instincts that gets quite squashed, almost at a I don't know, sort of a very sort of old brain type level, that that there's almost perhaps a sense that I'm under threat, or my body's operating as if I'm under threat. So it's not doing anything that it seems might be, that might require resource or time or energy that isn't about managing the immediate.
So as a clinical psychologist, what do you reckon is going on then?
Well, what we know about people who tend to end up in professions or in jobs where there's a very significant is that as children and young people, those people have often been either encouraged or through necessity have taken on a role, either vicariously or directly, in supporting other people, perhaps people who might naturally be expected to have the caregiving role themselves. So what we know about these people, us, perhaps it's better just to say us and be straightforward. Just try and be honest, hard as it is, that there have been instances, maybe not sort of persistently or chronically, but instances where, hi Dan, hi Kathy, yeah, that sort of that role has been arrived at or required a little bit too early, or at times where the young person or the child has had to push down their own needs, and that's then understood by that person as being a good thing, and even rewarded within the family environment, Hayama, or rewarded within the school or other aspects of their experience, and that's been a large part of what's shaped their choices, my choices, our choices about stepping into that role more professionally. So I think it probably extends back to lots of people. And I guess I would say, as a woman in this society, that there's a heavy emphasis on that, or there has been culturally, around mothering, that you're supposed to be this incredible, capable, blossoming, wonderful mother. It's all supposed to come really naturally, and you're supposed to love it all the time and be really good, and hide everything else that isn't anything to do with that narrative. So yeah, I think it depends at which level you look at it, but I think these messages are there from quite early on.
Well, I'm not going to buy into all of your stereotypes about, the fact that you're the only people that are placed a level of pressure on to be a blossoming parent.
No, sure.
That's just you being completely self-indulgent. But the
and speaking from my own lived experience, so that's
yeah. But the one thing, but the one thing that I do. The one thing I do notice and I hear at times in the patterns and the way that you describe your experiences is there's lots and lots of bits of the world where people have similar experiences in terms of, so for example, teachers, the outdoor industry, very often for those people working with young people, those people who are working in quite significantly demanding environments where there's a high level of financial consequences, that I don't always think that we end up noticing just how the steady erosion of self continues to occur, and we end up becoming a piece of the organisation, a piece of the machine, rather than a free thinking individual. That actually, in order to be able to, we're organic, and that we've got to put some time in sometimes to be able to focus and maintain and grow. And I've used this quote once already this evening, and actually, it'll probably make you smile because I've probably said it to you about 1,000 times. It's almost that first rule of first aid: is don't make yourself a second casualty. And sometimes that steady erosion of us, and us becoming a casualty of the circumstance or the situation, and being sometimes apologetic about it because I haven't perhaps worked hard enough, or I haven't achieved this outcome, even though the outcome that was set for me is a completely false and unrealistic one today.
Yeah. I think there's something that I've observed also in individuals who are chasing a lot of success or chasing a lot of significance around money, that there are strong ideas around about more and more money, more clients, more product, more service, and that in trying to achieve that, they never rest. And particularly, I guess, if you work for yourself or you're in a small organization, there's a reality to what it means if you take time off, or what it means if you don't answer that call, or what it means if you decide that your working hours stop at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock. And many people who work for themselves will say how incredibly hard it is to schedule their time, to choose when is work time and when isn't work time. And I think when you're constantly present as a worker, or you're constantly present for your business or for your charity, or that it's a transition then to being present for your own needs. And I think sometimes that can just go unnoticed, that you haven't been present for yourself for a long time.
Yeah. And I think the thing that we forget is, because we create very often this external frame of reference, whether that be frame of reference be based on our employer, whether that frame of reference be based on our friends, and we become attached to a concept or an ideal or a sense of reputation, and all those things, is that we're now working hard and driving to meet the requirements of the external, and actually forget, and at times, whilst whilst I'm a passionate believer in the philosophy of Stoicism, but actually the idea of being Stoic ends up getting almost manipulated, where this sense of sacrifice and ultimately that steady erosion of who we are, our health, our sense of well-being, and our relationship with probably the big and key components of our life just end up just suddenly getting abated away. And there's a point where most people suddenly realise, when they eventually take a moment to take stock, they suddenly go, oh my gosh, where have I gone? And actually, it's a shame that sometimes that only really occurs for some people because a major crisis, or a major health issue occurs in their lives.
Or a natural transition like retirement, or marriage, having children, taking maternity or paternity leave. I think there can be big moments for people, quite hard experiences, when you're suddenly cast into a different role, or some of that external validation or permission or structure is not there. There's some more things to be discovered, and sometimes that can be quite hard.
So if you were to give people three completely and utterly key things to focus on around keeping themselves safe and allowing them to focus on self-care, what would be, I don't know, your top three things?
What was really obvious to me yesterday, but quite hard to say, was that the NHS is not a very valuing system to work in, and I think the people in it are extraordinary. I work with some really extraordinary people. I would definitely go to them or wish them to be present for me if I was unwell. How the system currently constructed is not valuing, and I think when when we do feel valued, and particularly not just when someone said thank you or well done, but when we feel that somebody has truly valued what we've offered, and within that we feel proud of what we've done, that sense of value helps you reconnect, because it's a felt experience. You're feeling that sense of pride. You're immediately connected to yourself and who you are in a different way. So I think that the first thing is about value, and I think that must be very hard for people who are, independent workers, they're independent carers, they're, part of small businesses. It must be very, very hard to be able to do that for yourself, or find ways to do that, beyond just the kind of like, I'm glad I got that contract, or I'm glad I managed to look after my mum and do this for her, or I managed to look after my grandmother or my daughter, Sarah. So I think the first thing is value. That experience of truly feeling valued helps you connect with who you are.
And I think the challenge for, I agree wholeheartedly with what you've said. I think the challenge sometimes is that we've been taught, or most people have learned, that value is something that comes from externally rather than internally, and actually just sometimes taking stock of actually the contribution that I've made in my life today. For some people, at times, it is just, do you know what? Well, I've survived it, and actually that was important.
I guess I would go a step further, and I think that, I think a big part of my role, I supervise other people, is to tell them that they are good, and to tell them that what they have done is good, and is beyond good in many circumstances. And to use, if you are somebody who's a manager, to be a leader that uses opportunities like appraisal or supervision, to really clearly demonstrate value, and to judge in a positive way, to say that was extraordinary. Your ability to connect, that lifted other people up. I noticed the way that you talked to that person enabled them to engage with that in a different way, or I was really pleased that you were able to be so clear. I think those things are really important to notice, and to use structural things, because often I think appraisal or structural, management supervision, line management conversations can seem perhaps a bit vacuous, a bit empty, a bit like a kind of a checklist. We need to look at these things. We do it every month or every 6 months, and actually it's important as a leader to take charge of that process, and to be deliberately valuing and specifically valuing, because it's when that person connects, it's when they have that experience of feeling like they are proud of themselves and they've done well, that they are then present in the moment. It would be my...
Yeah, and the way that I would very simply, I agree wholeheartedly, in the way I think I'd very simply put that, for me, from my perspective, is just to ground it in evidence, is to ground it in things that you've actually observed people doing, so they can frame that sense of value around their own experience. It's really easy to be able to go, you were awesome today, you were amazing, and people will go, nice words, but the very cynical British way is now to go, that was only said because, as opposed to,
everybody, you'd always say that.
Yeah. Whereas if I now actually ground that, my observation, my experience of, in something that you've physically been involved in, then actually it's hard to be so dismissive of it. It's a lot easier to take ownership of that, and to go, do you know what? Whether I have a difference of opinion about whether that was or wasn't awesome, you actually, you saw it, you watched, you experienced what I did, you paid attention.
I said to me, I don't know how you see that. I don't know how you know that about me. And that for me was gold. Because he meant that is something that's important to him to be able to do, and that it hasn't been observed by other people. And that for me, as a leader or a supervisor, that's a golden moment. That's a moment I look for, that I want to be that person that particularly observes, because I think it's so important. It's crucial. It's what we need when we're children. It's what we need to grow. So yeah, I guess value, And I suppose the thing that I think is much more difficult is to be able to do that for yourself. So perhaps once a month, once a week, maybe at the end of the day, to be able to give yourself that kind of conversation, that kind of feedback, because that's what helps us grow. And many of us
Yeah, and
find that hard.
well, and that's sometimes because of the speed of the narrative that goes round and round. And so I think my first bit of advice to most people actually is to stop for a moment, and actually is to recognise and to pay attention to the fact that they're breathing. And whilst that may sound to some people at times quite comical, is that actually it's one of those things we can influence it, but we also do it automatically. And actually, just that focus on taking a moment to be able to focus on us breathing, almost to babysit the cycle of stuff that goes round and round, and just to spend a moment and go, I am in this moment, before I'm now going to go, actually, what did I do today that was pretty cool? And whether we wrap it up in a very structured model, something like appreciative inquiry, where we are focusing on what we've done well and using that then as a vehicle to be able to explore the stuff that we can grow and develop, or whether we just simply go, do you know what, I survived, and clearly Daniel has remembered something I've taught him, because he's just mentioned something about that. But actually, it's just taken that moment to be able to be in this space before we start automatically questioning whether we do or we don't.
Mm. So you asked me three things. So my second thing, and I guess it's actually to both of our lives, and also a kind of key component of Deep Water Mind, that the second thing for me would be about being in nature, and really being in nature. That there's something about what happens when you go for a walk, when you're in a forest, when you're on the water, when you're on a mountain, when you're by a river, that is very different than when you're in a building, you're in a car. That there's something important and old and crucially nonverbal about being in nature, and some of the things that hold us back most often are verbal conversations we have with ourselves, or the way that we filter the information that comes in from the outside. And so getting into relationship with something that is non-verbal is crucial. And one way to do that is to be in nature.
My number two as well, absolutely, and without necessarily sounding as though I've got too many flowers in my hair, then, and sometimes for me, it's to do it barefoot. In the path that I follow, then we talk about head, heart, and hara, and the way that you fuel your sense of groundedness, your sense of connection, is to be in places and spaces that aren't very constructed, where you just, and also in that space as well, if you can, is to be creative, because if you're creating something, then there is no comparison. You're doing something for the first time, and that sometimes that's really, really powerfully important, because you can't compare it to the last thing that you did, because it is just new.
That's my third thing. My third thing is learn something, be open. That learning state is the state that we observe children in when they play, that they're happy to create something that doesn't conform to social norms, that doesn't even necessarily all sort of sit within one form of reality or understanding, and that as adults it's difficult for us sometimes to play. One of the ways that we can do that is by deliberately placing ourselves within a context where our mindset has to be open, because we're learning something new. And my observation, both for myself and watching other people, is that it's quite hard, but that the tendency to sort of autocorrect, to settle to criticize is really deeply embedded in, in our culture, in our society. This like, oh well, I must punish myself. If I punish myself, I'll learn more quickly. Oh God, I didn't do that well enough. Oh, I must hound myself and harass myself because clearly that's going to make it happen. And really important experience to place yourself within a new something, a new relationship, a new environment, a new toy. That's why we love things, really. It's because that's what we want to do. That's why we love technology, because especially like touchscreen technology, we can place ourselves in relationship to new things all the time. It's incredibly addictive. So choose your new carefully each time.
And I think that's one of the things that sometimes you once, and you once described me as art and drama as you were maths and physics, in terms of the place that we work and the things that we experience. And that's one of the things that I'm always kind of conscious of, is that when we work in that emergent space and we work in that creative space, it's incredibly joyful to be able to do that. But yet, societally, and you must feel this more than almost anyone else working in the NHS, is that it's really hard to regulate it, and therefore then it's really hard to put a sense of perceived governance around it. And what if you get it wrong, and all that stuff that goes with it. But yet the thing that very often people need in order to be able to make a truly different liberation in their life is to be able to create that sense of agency. And that very often comes from new thinking, and new thinking comes from, at times, from an unhindered place that we call play and being creative and joyful.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think today doing this is our first experience of talking to each other in this way and sharing some of our thinking. And I guess that feels really positive to me, to be taking a small risk and being vulnerable to a sense of, well, maybe I wouldn't have done it quite like that, but being open to that, because of course without that experience you have nothing to reflect on. There's nothing to do next.
Anyway, so it's probably time that we should probably say goodbye.
Yeah. Should we share that we might do another one?
I think that's fairly guaranteed.
Do you think so? Do you think we should? Because I sent you a starter for 10. I don't know what you thought about the starter for 10.
Yeah, let's talk about some of the ones in the middle. But certainly I'm good with this.
Bit of gentle.
And the next one, and Tim, we've got to just say hello to Tim. Tim is to be fair, Tim kind of in the last couple of months, I think, truly embodies everything that we've talked about. Who's just said hello, who's genuinely thrown himself into having a go at creating a new life. So well done, Tim.
And hi, Anthony. Nice to see you. So yeah, let's sign off. Let's leave that. I don't even know how long we've been talking, but probably just the right amount of time.
As always. So I'll leave you to end it, because you're in charge as ever. And I'll talk to you soon.
Fantastic to talk to you. Take care.
Bye.